the number one takeaway I think that people don't do when they take their new puppy home or they bring their new puppy home is they don't give their puppy 100% supervision.
Back in 2017, Texas made a decision that had people scratching their heads. The state was pouring millions into what critics called the most ridiculous government initiative they'd ever seen. A puppy program. Not rescue puppies, not service dogs. Puppies trained to protect livestock. Ranchers who'd lost everything to predators were desperate. But most people thought training dogs was a waste of taxpayer money. Animal trainers scoffed. Economists predicted failure. The public reaction was brutal, with social media flooded with jokes about million-dollar mutts. But then something unexpected started happening on ranches across Texas. The numbers began rolling in, and suddenly nobody was laughing anymore. What happened next shocked everyone. The crisis nobody saw coming. Texas had a massive money-bleeding problem that was forcing ranchers out of business faster than anyone could count. Coyote populations were exploding across the state. What started as occasional livestock losses turned into nightly massacres. Ranchers would wake up to find newborn lambs torn apart, pregnant youth killed, entire flocks decimated. The predators weren't just hunting for food anymore. They were destroying livelihoods. At the Carl and Bina Sue Martin Research Ranch in Menard County, the situation reached a breaking point in 2009. That year, they managed to wean only 20% of their lamb crop. Think about that for a second. Out of every 10 lambs born, only 2 survived long enough to be useful. The rest ended up as coyote meals. This wasn't just happening at one ranch. Across Texas, sheep and goat operations were hemorrhaging money. Between 10 and 20% of lamb crops were vanishing every single year, and the financial losses were staggering. When you factor in the cost of raising a youth through pregnancy, feeding her, caring for her, only to lose the lamb to a predator, the numbers become devastating. Ranchers tried everything. They set snares. They hired helicopter gunners to hunt coyotes from the sky. They spent thousands on trapping equipment. Some even tried llamas as guard animals, hoping their size would intimidate predators. Nothing worked consistently. The coyotes adapted faster than the ranchers could respond. The economics were brutal. Fewer lambs meant less wool, less meat, and skyrocketing costs for consumers. Many ranchers who'd worked the land for generations started making impossible calculations about whether they could afford to stay in business. Some gave up entirely, selling off their flocks and walking away from family operations that had lasted decades. But here's what made it even worse. Traditional predator control wasn't just expensive and often ineffective. It was becoming increasingly controversial. Environmental groups pushed back against lethal control methods. Regulations tightened. The tools ranchers had relied on for years were slowly being taken away, and they had no viable replacement. By the time Texas A&M stepped in, the sheep and goat industry in Texas was on the edge of collapse. Something had to change, and it had to change fast. The solution they proposed, however, seemed completely insane to almost everyone who heard about it. And that's when the ridicule started. $1,000,000 puppies. When Texas A&M AgriLife announced their livestock guardian dog program in 2017, the response was swift and merciless. A government-funded puppy program. Seriously, that was taxpayer money being spent on what sounded like the world's most expensive pet adoption scheme. Critics had a field day. Social media exploded with memes showing fluffy white dogs lounging around while coyotes supposedly laughed in the background. Local news stations ran segments questioning whether this was really the best investment Texas could make. Financial analysts pointed out that each properly trained livestock guardian dog could cost over $1,000 in the first year alone, plus $500 annually after that. Multiply that across hundreds of ranches, and you're looking at millions of dollars going toward what skeptics called fancy farm pets. Even some ranchers were doubtful. They'd spent decades dealing with predators using proven methods like trapping and hunting. The idea that a dog, a single animal, could protect hundreds of sheep across thousands of acres seemed laughable. How could one fluffy Great Pyrenees be more effective than helicopters, snares, and experienced trappers? The pushback intensified when details about the program emerged. Texas A&M wasn't just handing out puppies. They were establishing a full research center in San Angelo dedicated entirely to studying these dogs. They hired specialists. They built bonding facilities. They launched multi-year studies involving GPS tracking collars, camera traps, and behavioral research. The public reaction grew even more skeptical when they learned about the bonding process. The puppies had to be raised with livestock starting at just 4 weeks old. They couldn't be regular pets. They needed specialized training lasting up to 2 years before they became fully effective guardians. The whole thing sounded absurdly complicated and expensive for what many assumed would be minimal results. Neighboring states watched with amusement. Industry conferences featured jokes about Texas throwing money at puppy problems. Even within the agricultural community, plenty of people thought Texas A&M had lost its mind. Traditional ranchers who'd been managing predators for 40 years weren't about to take advice from academics about raising fluffy dogs. But Reed Retton and his team at Texas A&M weren't backing down. They had data. They had historical precedent from European shepherds who'd used these dogs for centuries. And they were about to prove every single doubter wrong. The question was, would anyone believe the results? Why this actually made sense? While critics mocked the program, the researchers at Texas A&M were building something revolutionary based on centuries-old wisdom. Livestock guardian dogs weren't a new invention. They'd been protecting flocks in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East for literally thousands of years. Breeds like the Great Pyrenees, Anatolian Shepherd, Morma, and Akbos had been refined over millennia specifically for one purpose: keeping predators away from vulnerable livestock without human supervision. The science behind how these dogs work is fascinating. They don't protect livestock by chasing and killing every predator they see. That's not their job, and it would be exhausting. Instead, they use 3 sophisticated strategies that work together like a layered defense system. First, territorial exclusion. All canines, whether they're domesticated dogs, coyotes, or wolves, use scent marking to establish territories. When a livestock guardian dog marks its territory with urine during patrols, other canines recognize those boundaries. Coyotes, being smart survivors, generally avoid areas already claimed by other dogs. Why risk a confrontation when there's easier prey elsewhere? This alone can dramatically reduce predator presence without a single fight. Second, disruption. When predators do approach, the dogs use aggressive displays. They bark, they posture. They position themselves between the threat and the flock. Most predators hunting at night want an easy meal, not a confrontation with a 100-pound dog that's willing to make a lot of noise and draw attention. The disruption strategy works because it makes the cost of hunting too high for the reward. Third, direct confrontation. If territorial marking and disruption fail, livestock guardian dogs will physically engage predators. But here's what surprised the researchers. Even confrontations rarely result in dead predators. The dogs are large, intimidating, and aggressive enough to drive most threats away. They're not trying to exterminate the local wildlife. They're creating a buffer zone that makes their pasture the absolute last place a hungry coyote wants to hunt. What made Texas A&M's approach different was the systematic study of these behaviors under Texas ranching conditions. They weren't just adopting old-world techniques blindly. They were testing whether these dogs could handle the unique challenges of Texas. Massive pastures ranging from 500 to 2,500 acres, extreme heat, multiple predator species, and modern ranching operations where shepherds aren't present 24/7. The early data looked promising, but data doesn't matter if nobody's willing to try the program. That's when the real transformation began, when everything changed. The Carl and Bana Sue Martin Research Ranch became ground zero for proving the program's value. Remember that devastating 20% lamb crop from 2009, the one that almost shut down the entire operation? The researchers decided to make this ranch their primary testing ground. If livestock guardian dogs could turn around a situation that dire, they could work anywhere. They started small, introducing carefully bonded puppies to the flock. The dogs were raised alongside sheep from just a few weeks old during that critical 4 to 16-week bonding period when their social behaviors would be permanently shaped. The puppies didn't think they were sheep exactly, but they viewed the flock as their family, their pack, their responsibility to protect. The first year showed modest improvements. Predation losses decreased slightly, but not dramatically. Skeptics pointed to this as proof the program was overhyped. See, they said, $1 million puppies can't solve real problems. But the researchers knew something the critics didn't. Livestock guardian dogs don't reach full maturity and effectiveness until they're 18 to 24 months old. The young dogs were still learning, still developing their territorial instincts, still figuring out how to coordinate their patrols and responses. By the second year, something remarkable started happening. Lamb survival rates climbed. By the third year, the numbers became impossible to ignore. The Martin Ranch wasn't just meeting industry standards anymore. They were exceeding them. Since 2012, their lamb crop has consistently exceeded 100%. In some years, they hit 120%, meaning they were weaning more lambs than they had breeding use, thanks to twins and improved survival. Let that sink in. They went from losing 80% of their lambs to saving everything and then some. John Walker, the AgriFife Research Resident Director at San Angelo, watched the transformation firsthand. The same pastures that had been predator-killing fields became safe zones. Coyotes were still in the area. Camera traps proved that, but they stayed away from the flocks. Now, the dog's mere presence created an invisible barrier that predators refused to cross. Word started spreading through the ranching community. Other operations began reporting similar results. Cobby Porter, president of the Menard Livestock Protection Association, had been losing mature ewes at a rate of almost one per day. After introducing guardian dogs, his operation started raising 100% or better lamb crops annually. The financial implications were staggering, but nobody wanted to admit they'd been wrong. When profits proved the point, numbers don't lie, and the economics of the livestock guardian dog program were becoming impossible to dismiss. Ranchers who'd been skeptical started running their own calculations. Before guardian dogs, many operations were losing 10 to 20% of their lamb and kid crops annually to predators. After implementing the program, those losses dropped to near zero. Some ranchers reported complete elimination of predation losses. Let's break down what this meant in real dollars. A single lamb, worth $140 at market, might not seem like much, but multiply that across hundreds of animals and multiple birthing seasons. Ranchers using livestock guardian dogs were saving an average of 27 lambs per year in mid-sized operations. That's nearly $3,800 in direct savings annually from prevented lamb predation alone. But the benefits extended far beyond just the animals that weren't killed. Uses that previously died fighting off predators were now surviving. That added another $980 per year in savings for a typical 500 ewe operation. These mature breeding animals represented years of investment in genetics and flock development. Here's where it gets really interesting. The indirect benefits nobody had calculated. When predators constantly harass a flock, the stress affects reproduction rates. Ewes under pressure produce fewer lambs. They have lower conception rates. The animals that do survive show reduced weight gains because they're constantly on alert instead of calmly grazing. Studies from universities across the country confirmed what Texas ranchers were experiencing. In research from North Dakota, operations using guardian dogs saw predation rates drop from 6% to 0.4% at 4%. A USDA study in 2020 found that ranchers cut their annual livestock predation losses from 10 to 20% down to 0. The cost-benefit analysis started making sense even to the harshest critics. Yes, a guardian dog cost about $1,000 in the first year and $500 annually after that. But if that dog lived 7 years, the average lifespan in these programs, it only needed to save about 5 lambs per year to break even. Most dogs were saving 10 times that number. Bill Costanzo, the Agri-Life Extension livestock guardian dog specialist, started hearing reports of lamb and kid increases up to 100% in less than a year when producers switched from trapping to guardian dogs. Traditional predator control methods were costing thousands in equipment, labor, and helicopter time. Guardian dogs were cheaper, more effective, and required minimal ongoing investment. The math was undeniable. These weren't expensive pets. They were profit centers covered in fur, breaking new ground. What made Texas A&M's program truly revolutionary wasn't just using livestock guardian dogs. It was systematically figuring out how to make them work under modern ranching conditions. The Livestock Guardian Dog Bonding Project, launched in 2019, tackled questions nobody had answered scientifically. Should puppies be raised in pairs or individually? Did previously unfamiliar dogs work better as a team than litter mates? What bonding methods produce the most reliable guardians? How do you prevent roaming behavior that gets dogs killed on neighboring properties? The research team deployed GPS tracking collars on guardian dogs across multiple ranches. They monitored movement patterns 24/7, discovering that effective dogs routinely covered 500 to 1,000 acres daily. These weren't lazy animals sleeping with the flock. They were actively patrolling, checking boundaries, investigating disturbances, and maintaining their territorial presence. Camera traps revealed fascinating behaviors. The dogs weren't randomly wandering. They established patrol routes, spent more time near vulnerable areas like lambing grounds, and adjusted their activity levels based on predator presence. When coyotes were detected nearby, the dogs intensified their patrols. During quiet periods, they conserved energy by staying closer to the flock. This is so smart. The team also studied how to minimize the single biggest cause of guardian dog mortality. Research showed only 52% of these dogs lived to age 6, and 57% of fatalities occurred when dogs left the property and were shot by neighboring ranchers, hit by vehicles, or encountered other dangers. They developed better training protocols for teaching boundary respect. They created specialized feeding stations that kept dogs with their flocks instead of roaming home for meals. They implemented early socialization techniques that prevented the dogs from being overly aggressive toward humans while maintaining their protective instincts toward livestock. The program also addressed a critical challenge. Many guardian dog breeds weren't designed for Texas heat. Great Pyrenees with their thick white coats evolved for alpine conditions in the Pyrenees Mountains between France and Spain. Would they survive 100-plus-degree Texas summers? The research showed they could, but management practices mattered. Providing shade, fresh water, and adjusting feeding schedules helped the dogs thrive. Educational field days brought hundreds of ranchers to San Angelo to see the research firsthand. Webinars reached producers across the country. Published papers shared findings with the broader agricultural community. Texas A&M wasn't just running a program. They were building a knowledge base that transformed how people thought about non-lethal predator management. Other universities started taking notice. No other extension system had a program this comprehensive, and the results kept getting better. When critics became believers, the transformation in public perception didn't happen overnight. But when it came hard. Ranchers who'd spent years mocking the program started quietly calling the Texas A&M Extension Office. They had questions about implementation, costs, and whether these dogs could really handle their specific situations. Colby Porter's testimony became particularly powerful. He'd tried everything. Snares, aerial hunting, even llamas. Nothing worked against the relentless coyote pressure his ranch faced. Losing nearly one mature ewe daily wasn't sustainable. His operation was circling the drain financially. When he finally tried livestock guardian dogs, the change was immediate. Not gradual. Immediate. Overnight, predation pressure decreased dramatically. Within months, his operation stabilized. Now, years later, he raises 100% or better lamb crops consistently. Stories like Porter's spread through the ranching community faster than any marketing campaign could have achieved. Ranchers trust other ranchers. When a hardened producer who'd been skeptical became an advocate, people listened. The media coverage shifted, too. Those same news stations that had run skeptical segments started featuring success stories. Financial analysts who'd questioned the investment reviewed the data and admitted the program was delivering measurable returns. Even social media, previously filled with jokes, started sharing heartwarming videos of massive white dogs gently interacting with newborn lambs. Industry conferences that once featured jokes about the program started inviting Texas A&M researchers as keynote speakers. Other states began reaching out, asking how they could implement similar programs. Montana wanted in. Idaho wanted in. Even international operations from Australia to South America started studying the Texas model. The Texas Livestock Guardian Dog Association formed in response to growing demand. What started as a small group of pioneer ranchers grew into an organization with members across the entire United States. They elected board members, held annual meetings, and worked to protect legislative interests affecting guardian dog use. Agricultural publications that had been dismissive now ran feature articles about the program's success. The High Plains Journal, Texas Agriculture Magazine, even national outlets started recognizing livestock guardian dogs as legitimate predator management tools, not expensive experiments. The most telling shift came from the ranching community's younger generation. Kids growing up on operations using guardian dogs saw them as essential infrastructure, like fencing or water tanks. They couldn't imagine managing livestock without these dogs. The practice that seemed radical in 2017 became standard operating procedure in less than a decade. The regret from early skeptics was palpable. They'd wasted years and countless dollars on less effective methods while dismissing the solution right in front of them. The ripple effect. The success in Texas triggered a domino effect across American agriculture that nobody predicted. Operations in California facing similar predator pressures and even stricter regulations against lethal control started implementing guardian dog programs. The University of California system began their own research, studying economics and effectiveness in different terrain and climate conditions. Western states dealing with wolf reintroduction found guardian dogs particularly valuable. Unlike coyotes, wolves hunt in packs and can take down full-grown cattle. Traditional methods of protecting livestock from wolves often involved lethal control, which sparked fierce opposition from conservation groups and led to legal battles. Guardian dogs offered a middle ground. They could deter wolf packs without killing protected species. Research from Slovakia showed livestock guardian dogs successfully protecting flocks in wolf territory. While results varied based on placement and training, farms with properly integrated guardian dogs consistently lost fewer animals than unprotected operations. The data supported what Texas was discovering. These dogs worked across multiple predator species and environments. African nations began exploring guardian dog programs to protect livestock from lions, hyenas, and other large predators. In Kenya, conservation organizations combined compensation programs for livestock losses with guardian dog placement. The goal was reducing conflict between pastoralists and endangered predator populations. Early results showed promise, with lion killings dropping dramatically in areas where livestock were protected by dogs. Even Australia, dealing with massive populations of feral dogs, dingoes, and feral cats, threatening both livestock and native wildlife, started studying Texas A&M's bonding protocols. The Australian context presented unique challenges, but the fundamental principles remained sound. The program's influence extended beyond just ranching. Wildlife biologists started recognizing that effective livestock protection could be a conservation tool. When ranchers lose animals to predators, they often respond with lethal control that doesn't discriminate between problem animals and the broader population. But when livestock are protected by guardian dogs, tolerance for predators increases. Ranchers who aren't losing money to depredation are less likely to support aggressive predator control measures. Environmental groups that were initially skeptical of anything involving domestic animals and wildlife habitat began acknowledging the benefits. Guardian dogs represented a non-lethal approach that could reduce human-wildlife conflict that aligned with conservation goals far better than traps, poisons, or aerial hunting. The economic modeling from Texas became a template. Other states and countries used the cost-benefit analyses developed by Texas A&M to justify their own programs. Grant funding flowed to research projects studying guardian dog effectiveness in different contexts. What started as a ridiculed puppy program in Texas was becoming a global movement in non-lethal predator management. Nobody was laughing anymore. Where we are now today, the Texas A&M Agri-Fife Livestock Guardian Dog Program stands as one of the most successful animal training and agricultural innovation initiatives in modern American history. The numbers speak for themselves. Hundreds of ranches across Texas now use guardian dogs as their primary predator control method. Collectively, these operations are saving millions of dollars annually through reduced livestock losses. The sheep and goat industry that was struggling to survive in the early 2000s has stabilized and in many areas grown. The program continues expanding its research. Current studies examine how guardian dogs affect non-target wildlife. Do they harm deer fawns? Do they interfere with quail and turkey populations? The data so far suggests properly trained dogs focus on canine predators and generally leave other wildlife alone, though individual variation exists. Health and nutrition research helps extend dog longevity. Remember, longer-lived dogs mean better economics for ranchers. Studies on feeding strategies, veterinary care, and environmental adaptations are improving survival rates and working lifespans. The breeding programs have matured. Texas now has established networks of reputable breeders who understand the specific traits needed for livestock guardian work. Not every Great Pyrenees or Anatolian Shepherd makes a good guardian dog. Temperament, drive, and instinct matter enormously. The breeding programs select for dogs with the right combination of protective instinct, livestock bonding ability, and human tolerance. Educational programs reach thousands of producers annually through field days, webinars, and online resources. The Texas A&M Extension Office publishes regular updates, training guides, and research findings. Bill Costanzo manages over 20 guardian dogs across multiple research sites. collecting real-world data that improves best practices. The program's influence on policy has been significant. The Texas Livestock Guardian Dog Association actively works to protect ranchers' rights to use these dogs effectively. They advocate against legislative changes that would restrict guardian dog use or impose burdensome regulations. Perhaps most importantly, the program changed minds. It demonstrated that innovation doesn't always mean high-tech solutions or expensive machinery. Sometimes the best answer to a modern problem is an ancient tool applied with scientific precision. The ranchers who mocked the program in 2017 now recommend it to neighbors. The critics who called it a waste of money now cite it as a model of effective agricultural extension work. The public that joked about million-dollar puppies now recognizes these dogs as hardworking professionals protecting an essential industry. Texas didn't just invest millions in a puppy program. They invested in saving an entire sector of agriculture. And everyone who doubted them learned a valuable lesson about dismissing innovation too quickly. So, what do you think about Texas's guardian dog revolution? Have you seen these dogs in action?